I'll do.
Again.
I'll do again. Julie, the probation officer. So we've decided she's got shitloads of notes. I'm going to let her say a few thank yous she wants to do. We're going to do little segments. We're going to talk about victims firstly today. And our parting shot, as we parted company last time was here, is, right, this isn't about fucking anyone over.
Oh, God,
is
no.
it?
No.
You know, she started on doing these little boxes she's been putting away. It's a bit of therapy for you, this.
It has been. It's been inspiring. Like, the amount of people who've liked last week's interview, the comments. It's like, I know you use boxes as an analogy, yeah?
Yeah.
I use suitcases, right?
Yeah.
So you carry, instead of having boxes in my head, I imagine carrying physical suitcases around life with me.
Yeah.
I've got some 23 kg weighters that I drag around, and I've also got various hand luggage for different sizes. Yeah.
Yep.
And you've made me open one of the big suitcases that I've carried around, and you know, it's actually, I do carry around suitcases. I've got files, I've got records of my achievements, but I very rarely look at them. But doing this has helped open the floodgates, I'm afraid.
No, that's good. So like a day, we're going to do little segments, probably put a couple up a week. She's made loads of notes, but the first one, I was asked by Julie, you know, how often do I think of victims of crime? I know quite a few. Obviously, when I worked on the healthcare, which is the hospital wing at Strangeways, up close and personal with some, I've said, evil and people I hated, and as close to that as you can get. However, rest of my prison service, I didn't know why people were in, and, you know, impact of victim statements and the like. I was never privy to anything like that, so I'd know somebody like Mark Bridger, you know, what he'd done, who we were, and unfortunately I had to work with him for 10 months. However, as a probation officer, it's everything, isn't it?
Yep.
It's the crime, how it's affected the victims. You will have and will be in the future working with, you know, people who have committed just unmentionable things. Yep.
Yeah. And like I said in the last interview, when you're working with somebody and you know what they've done, yeah, and you do have to sort of put that sometimes to the side. But when you get allocated a case and you have to do an assessment, yeah, like, you know, sort of document where they're at with everything. So accommodation, finances, relationships, emotional well-being, money, work. You know, you get all that information. One of the big parts of an assessment is looking at the victim impact. Now, depending on the seriousness of the harm caused, the level of impact on myself, after reading it, varies. Some crimes you don't get to see. The victim doesn't want to give a statement.
Yep.
But victims of burglaries, things like that. Although I was a victim of, my mum was a victim of burglary when I was a kid, and I remember how it affected her knowing someone else had been in my house. Yeah, that really upset her.
Quite definitely.
But when you're talking about victims of serious crimes, you have to read. Often there's photographs in the file, and I remember doing. Have you heard of what a MALRAP?
No.
It's multi-agency lifer risk assessment procedure. I think MALRAP. It's basically a multi-agency lifer assessment that you do at the very start of someone being convicted for murder.
Okay.
What made you laugh there? Acronyms.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, this is serious. I know I laugh, and I'm going to go into that later.
Yeah, because you got to have humour. We've already talked about dark humour. I'd like to fit that in. I don't know how we will fit that in.
I know. At some point,
maybe some anonymous type stuff. But yeah, it is serious stuff.
But when you're reading and preparing, like, you're going to go interview someone, so you need to know what the victim's family have said, particularly in like where the direct victim it's been a fatality. Their family can put forward statements, and often you read things and you go away with a really sick feeling in your stomach. Before you even meet the person.
Yep.
And I remember there was one multi-agency lifer risk assessment.
You could just say the acronym.
MALRAP. There was one MALRAP I did, and it was particularly awful murder on a homeless guy. And it was all caught on CCTV outside a museum. I'm not going to say where.
Yeah.
But it was all caught on the CCTV. And when I had the meeting with the police, and we were looking through all their evidence, and you get to see more of what the police evidence is in that case.
Yep.
Normally, you get the standard documents from the police. They call it MG5, MG6, Crown Prosecution Service documents. But this, you got to see everything. And I had the file, and they'd actually released stills of this lead up to the murder on TV. And then in this file there was a CD saying harrowing, warning, harrowing images, and it was the actual full footage of this guy smashing this homeless guy's head in. I chose not to watch that. Part of me, was thinking, just out of curiosity, should I watch it? But then I just decided that I'd read what had happened.
Yeah.
I knew what had happened. You know, the evidence against him was there. It was just the CCTV was documented, so it wasn't like the police were pulling information from this and that. It was there. And but I chose not to watch that, because I just believed it would like watching a snuff movie, wouldn't it? Like, you know, watching someone get killed.
Yeah, I'd never understand that. I think you did right off the bat. I'm going to ask you now, because, you know, yourself, you are an empath, you care about people, the interactions with probation, the dynamic security side of it, you're all for that. And a lot of people were in agreement with you. Interacting with people in a way like that, away from sort of an office environment when you're doing a job, is valuable. Do you think, like, I think this happens with a lot of sort of responders. If I class you as a responder, I'm talking about fire, ambulance, police, prison service, people who are involved in dark stuff by nature of the job, like a lot of prison officers, heavy drinkers, you know, maybe try not to see things or get involved in things because it definitely will affect you. Do you think a lot of probation officers who maybe come across as cold or uncaring, that's why they do that?
Yeah. It affects people in different ways, doesn't it?
Do you think that some people you work with along the line, colleagues and that, who, you know, try and put on this hard exterior, that at some point it is going to affect them?
Sometimes you've got to sit there and be tough. I'm always being fair and honest and open, and I say it how it is, black and white. I don't beat around the bush. And that has gained me, I think, good respect and a rapport with people, because they know where to stand. I'm not going to try and trick them into anything. Do you know what I mean? They'll trick themselves into something eventually.
Honesty is the best policy, isn't it?
It is. But I know that a lot of officers, probation officers like prison officers, come from all different backgrounds, all different ages, different life experiences. And, you know, all I've done in terms of working with people I work with is bring my previous experiences from before probation into it. So I'm bringing real life experiences that have worked for me and I've seen work. And I just feel like I don't never want to stop doing this job until I retire, despite how hard it is. Like I say, there is some little suitcases that probably won't be opened and thought about for a long time.
Yep.
But just discussing this, like talking about, you know, how I felt, I can go right back to how I felt when I was looking at that CD and thinking, should I watch this? But I didn't have to. But if you're in court, as a court officer, like I was before at one point, you have to stand and listen. Listen to the evidence. Listen to, you know, and so you don't get away from it, you know.
Well, everybody who's a criminal, who's not all their life, is going to have a probation officer. So somebody in your line of work is going to have to deal with that person, no matter how horrendous the crime, aren't they?
We think about victims not just as the direct victims, like the person that is, like, say, an assault or a targeted attack or something like that. But, like, so victims could be, like, random members of the public, yeah, who get robbed or whatever, who get assaulted, who get raped, all that type of stuff. So general members of the public. But at the end of the day, what we have to sort of think about is, are the perpetrators themselves also victims of crime and abuse? A lot of sex offenders, people convicted of sexual offences, have been sexually abused as children, and that has completely messed up their views of how relationships should be and their understanding of it.
Why do you have to take that into account? It's not to do with sentencing or anything, is it?
No.
So
it's to do with managing their emotional well-being, because, you know,
upon release
and during prison. I've worked on the VP with Vulnerable Prisoners Wing a few times in different prisons, and find that exceptionally challenging. Although they're very compliant, that group of offenders.
Well, that is worth mentioning. You know, I've had prison officers who said, you know, I'm going to be going to a sex offenders prison. What it is, a sort of quieter population, isn't it? Because, you know, that all the people together, it's very similar offences. So if you like, it's
the general, you know, you can't stereotype, right? Because you could imagine visualising a person as this you know, you say, explain to me what you think a paedophile looks like.
Yep.
Yeah? What would you say?
Classically, I think people would think older, white, male, and some of them, very cliched, looks exactly like that. However, on the healthcare, we had a couple of old guys. One was in because he didn't get his bottle of Guinness in his old people's home. He set his flat on fire, and every officer who come on made a judgment.
Yeah.
Well, look at that nonce there. I says, well, no, actually, he's in for arson. You know, he's not.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty comes, Julie, because you are a professional. People don't have to be professional, so they would be judged as the worst people in society.
But I know that the harm caused to their victims will be lifelong.
Do you honestly think? I know I'm not going to go off topic.
And
I'm
their
going to come back to the
families,
victim.
that's what I'm saying.
Do you think in court, because I don't, in a lot of cases, that the actual damage done is taken into account? For instance, if somebody, it was a case recently, somebody said, you know, just have a look at this, Sam, this was a relative of mine. Somebody was mistakenly attacked in a pub with a hammer, yeah? The lad who did it got 5 years. That guy is, and people know what I mean, I'm not being disrespectful, he was cabbaged, he was brain dead, he was in hospital, he's going to be cared for the rest of his life, you know, never see his kids growing up, all them things. And then you look at it, 5 years. Lifetime for that family of suffering. It's not, and it's not 5 years to serve.
No.
You know, so.
Don't get me started on
all
sentencing.
Right,
Not on sentencing.
Okay, well, let's move away from that. Let's go back to your victims.
Yes, the victims.
Do you ever meet victims?
Sometimes, in the context of, I might be working with a female offender.
Yep.
And I know she's a victim of domestic violence. by a lad on probation or in prison as well. She might be on probation for stealing, drug dealing, whatever.
Yep.
Vulnerable women who are victims, but are still in this abusive relationship. And you see, I've been to child protection conferences where their families attend and try and step in to look after the children because it's not safe for them to be around mum and dad. So they're victims. And again, it's a ripple effect. That's what we call it. It's not just the person who has actually been harmed. It filters out.
Have you ever been involved as probation in a parole hearing where family members, victims, are trying to keep someone locked up who they believe will be a danger or whatever? Have you ever been involved in that side of it?
Yes.
How harrowing is that? Because I've always said if somebody kills your loved one, for instance, and they get 20 years and then they're up for parole, you obviously don't want that person out. I've come across a lot of people who have done witness impact statements for parole, have had their say, and it's almost like you're not allowed to rest. He's never allowed to go out yet. Time's a great healer. However, if someone's coming up next year for parole who killed your loved one, so from your point of view, being involved in them, looking at the victims, how is that? Is it, it's going to be harrowing, isn't it?
Look, it's very, very rare. There was one point I did a load of parole hearings, one after another, and I think out of all of them, there was only one time where the victims' parents attended, but the parole board said that they couldn't, I had their victim impact statement part of my assessment.
Yep.
So it was me who shared that information with the parole board, not the parents. And obviously, you almost have to pretend they're not there in that situation, and just go with your honest opinion and what assessment you've come up with for that person's recommendation for that person's release. Now, have you heard of the victim liaison scheme?
No.
Okay. So it's sad because I think that at the minute, anybody who is sentenced to prison for 12 months or more for a violent offence, or there's a direct victim, that victim gets the opportunity to engage with a victim liaison scheme. And that will inform them of, keep that victim informed of any applications for parole, any move to Cat D, any concerning contact that they're having. The victim can go to the victim liaison.
Is this new?
Oh no, it's been around for months.
Well, lots of people have, over the past 4 years, contacted me where they've been a victim of crime. Let's say somebody got 3 years and they've been released early, and then they bumped into them in town and said, no one's informed us.
You've got to act. The victim will be approached and contacted. And to be fair, some victims just say, particularly survivors of crime, maybe mainly males, will say, I don't want to know. It's happened. He served his time. That's it. If he doesn't come near me again, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But then what upsets me and gets to me is that you can have a lot of people perpetrating domestic violence against their partners.
Yep.
Male, female, same-sex relationships.
Yep.
And get 8 months for a common assault, right?
Yep.
But it's quite a nasty common assault, say. And that has been the third or fourth short sentence under 12 months that victim has been suffered. So the same partner, repeat victim, domestic violence, but only going away for 4 months, coming out, this and that. They don't get the option to have a victim liaison officer because the perpetrator hasn't been given a 12-month or more sentence. And I think there'll be a lot of victims, men and women, who would benefit from that support
But how does that?
But I don't.
Support?
There's not the resources to deliver that. You know. I mean, and it must be really hard being a victim liaison officer, because they're the people who have to go and sit with the person all this has happened to, and explain that I'm sorry, but this person, like you say, who murdered your son, has been given parole and will be out. They have to go and deliver that news.
Do they?
Yeah. So big up respect for victim liaison officers. And if you know someone who is a victim, and they've got the person who's done whatever to them, and they've gone to prison, and you haven't been offered that, they've gone to prison for 12 months or more, like, find out about it.
Who can be a victim liaison officer?
It's again the same process. A lot of people go from probation, police, social services into that job, and they receive special training. And their job is to completely protect the victim's rights and the victim's wishes where possible. They negotiate with us exclusion zones, restraining orders, non-contact orders. Do you find them to be effective? If the person who's committed the crime is genuine, that they're sorry and won't do it again, it's very effective. But there's always the chance if it's someone's particularly controlling or doesn't have any
or sneaky
respect for the law, manipulative, predatory. But they have the option, you know, they have alarms fitted in there. People have alarms, can have alarms fitted in there, CCTV. But yeah, I mean, like I say, to be fair, victims go from all the way through the criminal justice system, not just the victims of direct crime.
Have you had anything to do with restorative justice?
That was just on the end of my notes there.
Was it?
It is an area that I would, I mean, if I didn't have to work and pay me rent, yeah, I'd know so much more about everything, because I would research and read, but I just don't have the time.
Just tell people basically what restorative justice is.
Restorative justice is a scheme that was set up to try and to look at the impact of the perpetrator of a serious crime meeting the victim or approaching the victim in a letter with the help from
it can come from
professionals.
either side, can't it? The victim can apply for it.
The victim can say, I want to send this letter to this person.
Yep.
Then the restorative justice workers will look at it and think, actually, you know, the prisoner say, I don't want to read it. They can't make someone read. They can't force them to read the letter from the victims, and vice versa.
Yep.
Again, some victims, I say, but then again, I watched at a conference, there was a couple, I can't remember the name of the kid that was murdered, but it was a one-punch killer thing, and a 19-year-old had died, and I think the lad who'd hit him and killed him was very young as well, 19, 20, and they stood on stage and gave their account of their experience of restorative justice, and they actually, visit the perpetrator in prison now, because they can totally understand.
There's some people that are forgiving, isn't there?
I cried, just listening to their story, but it isn't for everyone, restorative justice. But, the prisoners say, I want to tell them I'm sorry. I don't care if I don't want to sit in a room with them, but can you just please ask them to read this letter? But rather than just saying to prisoners, just write to your victims, hopefully they don't know where they live. So you would go through the restorative justice, which keeps confidentiality, and people who want to do it and people who don't, make sure that that's followed and respected.
Have you got anything else on your
Not
victims?
on victims at the minute. Well, obviously I could go on forever, but yes, I have been a victim of crime. Other than, obviously when I was growing up, I witnessed some domestic violence, which was my mum. But while I was writing an essay for my degree for probation about being a victim of crime,
yep.
I'm sat in the living room, someone opens me back here, goes in my shed and nicks my bike while I'm sat reading. And I was later on I thought, what a cheek. I'm sat writing an essay about being a victim of crime and someone steals me bike. And
if you'd have known they were there, would you have confronted them?
Yeah. Yeah. My instincts kick in if I didn't think it was safe. But I was just looking around the estates where we lived at the time. I thought if I see a kid on it, I'll just boot them off it.
Really?
No, I wouldn't have. But no, that's all I'd like to say. And again, any comments, things like that, I'd love to read them.
We are going to do a proper question and answer. Any questions for Julie? If we can answer them, we will. Thanks for coming. I'll see you.